This is Game On, discussing the biggest games and all the latest sports news with Johnny Montalbano and Hank Indictor on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
It's showtime, folks. It's episode 10 of Game On, presented by Knack here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Johnny Montalbano, Hank Indictor with you as we have a lot to discuss here on episode 10. You can tell we are a little bit excited still. Couple of days removed from the Rangers series. It's amazing what a difference an episode makes. I think we started last show, we were a little down for obvious reasons, and now we feel like we're on top of the world. I know how he feels, but I'll ask him anyway. Hank, welcome. How are you?
I am feeling excellent. Rangers come back from 3-1 down on to the second round against the Carolina Hurricanes team that, let's not kid ourselves, is going to be a very, very tough uphill battle. But do I think it's impossible? Absolutely not. You look at what the Rangers have been doing. There's a reason this has been their motto.
For sure. No quit in New York. I mean, it could not be more appropriate
And
when you look
let
at
me
the
just
series.
Show off what this towel says here.
That's great. I mean, it's so true. I mean, they could not have picked a better hashtag to describe their opening round series, and we will get to that in just a couple of moments. But folks, of course, if you want to comment about the Rangers or anything in the world of sports, because there's so much we can get to and so much we're not going to really get to that we can discuss as well. Always you can follow us on our social media platforms. We're on Twitter at GameOnETB, Facebook.com/GameOnETB, and of course our Instagram account, GameOn_ETB. Now, again, as like I said, we have a lot to get to. We've got not only the Stanley Cup playoffs, we've got the NBA playoffs, which are going to start their conference finals tonight. And in fact, so much NBA to discuss.
Semifinals.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we will. Yep, absolutely. We'll get to that. We have an NBA roundtable that we're going to have in about a few minutes with our own Nick Morgasen and Paul Lombardi from the 3&D over at Review and Preview. We'll have him on. We'll have them on to discuss all the prior series and look ahead to these series upcoming. And of course, the NFL schedule release happened this week. It's a crazy week when you have the NFL schedule release and it's not even the second biggest story that's going on. It's very rare for the NFL to take a back seat in that regard. But when you have so much like this going on, that's a good problem to have. So we'll get to all of that over the course of the show. But Hank, obviously, we got to start for the second straight week with the Rangers because, when we spoke on episode 9, they were down 3-1, and we were trying to find any possible way they could come back, let alone make it to a game 7, let alone win this whole series. And my only hope for the series when it was 3-1 when we spoke last week was the fact that the Rangers goaltending situation was still, to me, the advantage. And as this series went further and further along and really throughout, it really showed itself to be the case. And like you said, the no quit in New York mentality, they come back in game 5 from 2-0 down, game 6 from 2-0 down, game 7, they were trailing twice and they came back and won it in overtime. I mean, there's so many different ways to take this series, but obviously you being the diehard Ranger fan, of course, I'm a Ranger fan too, but you were at the games as well. So I want to give you the floor here. Your thoughts about this entire series and where we go from here.
It was an absolute roller coaster. And look, to be blunt, this was a series that really shouldn't have gone to a 7th game. I mean, look, we know what happened in game 1 happened, but I'd rather not dwell on the negative. It was really looking bleak. Igor had game 4 really as a whole. I'm not even going to say it was their worst of that playoffs. It was the worst of their whole season because I had never seen the Rangers just simply play that badly. I mean, I don't know what it was. They just folded like a cheap suit, and I was pretty disappointed. But then all I was hoping for was going into game 5, they would just show some fight, show some comeback. And I think there were really 2 things in that game that turned around the series. First of all, there was the goal scoring outburst where right near the end of the second period, they were down 2-0. And things are really looking bleak. They get like 3 goals right near the end. Granted, Pittsburgh ties it on what was a really bad goal, but that seemed to really put all the life right back into the crowd. And then, of course, was the Jacob Trouba hit on Sidney Crosby. And it's funny. I've been hearing a lot of Pittsburgh fans cry foul, saying that it was a dirty hit. Anyone who looks at the replay of what had happened, that was clearly an incidental contact. And Pittsburgh fans were slandering Jacob Trouba, saying he's one of the dirtiest players in the NHL, which, as someone who has watched pretty much every single game of the Rangers this season, I can tell you that that's not true because, yes, he gets hits, but like they're all usually big, clean hits. I mean, the one he had in the game against Chicago way back in November, December, he hurt a guy that day, but that wasn't like, he clearly wasn't intending it. If you look at his mannerisms, he doesn't play that way. And also, he never really gets suspended or severely penalized for his hits too. So he has been, that hit best basically was a good turnaround for the Rangers. They find a way to win that game. They score that goal to take the lead in the third period. And then obviously the rest of that game, it just was so nerve-wracking until that empty net goal happened. And then going into Pittsburgh, they're down 2-0 again. And hey, same story. They capitalized on the power play goals. That Mika Zibanejad goal with like, what was it? It was a double minor penalty, gave the Rangers the lead. I think right then and there, I thought like, hey, we're going back. But then, of course, Pittsburgh ties it on that really bad Jacob Trouba turnover. Hey, Trouba giveth, Trouba taketh away. But the way they won that game with like the pop fly fluky goal going above Louis Domingue, I was just like, my eyes just bulged and I like just jumped up at the table from the bar that I was at watching that with one of my good friends, the same friend who actually joined me at Game 7, by the way. And then when they scored, he and I were, and everyone else at the bar were going nuts. And then it dawned on me that I had never until last Sunday been to a Game 7 in any sport. And that just, I had so much going through my head that day. I showed up like super early to the Garden. I was rubbing shoulders with a few of the alumni who were doing their meet and greets. Brian Mullen in particular, who I'd seen like 2 or 3 times this series. He's a super nice guy, by the way. Mm-hmm. And going into the Garden, the atmosphere was absolutely electric. And Johnny, I got to tell you, you want to know what really gave me chills before that game? When the Rangers came onto the ice and they played Teenage Wasteland. I know it has a real name, but when they played
Baba O'Reilly.
Yes, Baba O'Reilly. I always call it Teenage Wasteland. So they go up on the ice to that song, and then the national anthem happens. I knew they were going to win. Granted, I didn't know how they were going to win, but like I had a good feeling about it. And then it was another one of those games where Pittsburgh had some controversial goals. Now, let me be honest about this game. Those goals that Pittsburgh scored were totally the correct calls. The first one, they had to stop the clock to see if the puck crossed the line. That was absolutely the correct call. If you look at it above the monitor, the puck was clearly past the red line. That was a good goal. And then the elephant in the room was the high sticking call. Now, a lot of the people in my section thought that Pittsburgh got benefited with the call like usual. I was probably in the minority of Ranger fans in the building that felt otherwise, because here's the thing. Even if it really was a high stick, the stick was like just barely above the goal crease. So then it was ruled a goal on the ice. So you can't really change it. And if you don't have enough evidence, you have to give them that goal. So it was the correct call. The Rangers once again fought back. And like you said, I think that Keandre Miller goal was the real turning point. That was like one of the biggest another fluky double doink goal that went off of Jari. It's tied the game. And then, again, you had the turnover and things were really and it really was important because things were looking bleak in the third period. Like before Mika scored that goal, the Rangers looked awfully sloppy, but then they got that tying goal they needed. The Garden was absolutely erupting. And Johnny, believe me when I tell you that once we reached overtime, there was no doubt in my mind that the Rangers were winning this game. Penguins, like, to give up a lead like that, like so late in the 7th game, like that has to be crushing for a team. And the Rangers needed to win that overtime and win it quickly because you saw what happened in game 1. The triple overtime, it dragged out. They got that power play. Gallant did the right thing by calling that timeout. And right then and there, you could just feel a goal coming. And nobody needed that goal more than the guy on my jersey, Artemi Panarin, who had pretty much been struggling all series. This is moments like these are why we paid him the big bucks. And moments like these I'm sure are probably why he was willing to take less money to come to New York. And I think some more thoughts I have going into Game 7. I'm glad the Rangers were able to win this game despite the fact that Crosby came back for Game 7 after that freak hit that happened in Game 5. And I'm glad that it happened against Tristan Jarry because we would have been hearing a lot of, they won against our AAA squad. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't really matter. They came back from 3-1. And look, I'm not going to lie. It wasn't always pretty during those comebacks, but, a win's a win. And whether they win this next series or not, this really did a lot for a lot of the young players on this team who have never before experienced the drama of postseason hockey. And it's gonna really be a big stepping stone for this team going forward in years to come. And look, as Brian and I have stated multiple times, we don't even think that their window is even open yet. I think next year or like the following year is when you're really going to see the window opening and the window of opportunity. But right now, they're on to the second round. I couldn't be happier. And as I said, Carolina is really talented. You got Svechnikov and Sebastian Aho, to name a few, both really talented goal scorers. This is a team that's both skilled and extremely physical, and they've got big guys, so it's going to be a really tough task. And not to mention, they're a really well-coached team. Rod Brind'Amour is one of the best coaches in the league. He really did a lot with that squad over the course of a few years, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I cannot wait for tomorrow night, and I can't wait to be back on Sunday afternoon for Game 3 at the Garden. LGR, baby.
That's right. Yeah. And there's a few ways. Yeah. Keep that rally towel going. Yeah. There's a few things I have about this series too, Hank. And, we've spoken about this before. The young kids on this team. Now, defensively, the young guys were being exposed by the Pittsburgh forwards and veterans. Mm-hmm. That was always a concern for me about this series. And it showed itself. And Igor had done everything possible. And he showed it again in Game 7, why he's probably should win the Vezina, and why I think the Rangers ultimately, one of the reasons why the Rangers ultimately won this series. But, the fact that, let's be honest, your big veteran players on this team, like Mika, like Kreider, Artemi Panarin, were really held in check for the majority of the series up until about Game 6. And then really Game 7, they just, completely took off. That was remarkable. If you would have told me that the Penguins would have held the Rangers guys in check and being exposed like that, I don't think the Rangers would have won this series. And it looked like that for a while when it was 3-1. And then, when Pittsburgh jumps out quick. And that's what was amazing too. The Penguins jumping out to multiple goal leads early. And you were waiting for that third goal, which really, really iced it. And I even was saying, I think the biggest goal in this series and in Game 7 was the goal that the Rangers tied it up at 2 because I don't think they're coming back from 3-1 down now. That I know they've come back from a 4-1 deficit, but it just felt a little different in Game 7 being down 2 goals. So the fact that the Rangers are able to come back and tie it up at 2, I think was huge. And I think turned this game around because it could have been an entirely different game if they don't score or if the Penguins jump out to a 3-1 lead in Game 7. But, the Ranger veterans come up in a big way. Igor makes 43 saves in Game 7. Absolutely remarkable on so many different levels. And
by the way, can I interject with one more thing that I forgot to say in my little monologue spiel?
Absolutely. It's all yours.
And I want to repeat something that a point that I made on Blue Truth last night, and Jim Schmeidenberg of I believe it's New Blue Shirt Underground Railroad. That's another great Ranger podcast you ought to check out, by the way. Yep. We both agreed that Igor didn't necessarily steal the game in the series because obviously he did give up a few goals. However, with that being said, I think the important part about Igor Shesterkin during the comeback, he made the big saves when it matters most. And he's without him, forget the fact that we're even in the second round. Who knows if the Rangers are in the playoffs? He really saved their bacon big time this year. And Yeah, he, like you said, he's definitely going to win the Vezina, and there's a reason he's finished in the top 3 for the Hart Trophy finalists.
Yeah, and I think if the Rangers would have lost, this series, we would not be looking at Igor being the reason why. And
No.
then you get the Game 7, and I thought it was very interesting to see them, Jerry actually play, because I know he's been very good for them this year, but I mean, to put him back in that kind of spot, and he had a couple of goals given up that were really not his fault. The one of the Ranger goals was deflected twice on the way to the net. But you know what? You got to take advantage of that. So absolutely remarkable all the way around. Yeah, the Game 7 feeling, I'll tell you, I've been to the Garden for Game 7 before. It is remarkable. When they play Bob O'Reilly, the first note, it does something. It just pumps you up that much more. And then, of course, the anthem is great. I've always said I wish, and it's nothing against the live performances and who's playing, but I really wish they would always keep the John Emirante rendition of it. I mean, it's like what Yankee Stadium does, that they always play a recorded version of the anthem. I wish they would do that.
Oh, with Robert Merrill.
Yeah, they do Robert Merrill, and then they also add, I think, some other Army bands or whatnot. But I always wish they would do that just because of what John Emirante meant to the Rangers. And, of course, probably the most memorable national anthem obviously in Ranger history, but in sports history, it's the Game 7 of '94.
Oh,
so,
you can barely hear him because.
It's and trust me, if it ever gets to that point again, it'll happen again. But yeah, just it's so remarkable because just of how this happened. Them coming back from 3-1 down, which they seem to do a lot now. I mean, they've done it 3 times, coming back from 3-1 down, and just digging deep into these numbers and digging deep into the games and seeing how they do it. Absolutely amazing. I mean, this season was already a success going into the playoffs. It's taken that much more. But then, of course, Hank, there's another part of you that wants to keep going and see if it keeps going. And we'll see that now as they take on a Carolina Hurricanes team starting tomorrow night. And I tell you, as somebody who was very confident, had the Rangers in 5 against the Penguins, I'm not as confident this go around against the Hurricanes. And I just think it's because Carolina it's not even really with the Rangers. I think it's just Carolina is really that good. They've got multiple former Rangers on their team. I think they've got 6 guys. It looks like
Foss, D'Angelo, Brendan Smith, Derek Stepan. Oh, Antti Raanta, even one of their goalies.
And one more.
And Brady Shea.
Yep, there you go. See, look at that. We're playing almost a game show moment right here. But yeah, so they obviously have the experience, and it looks like Anderson's going to be back in goal for the Hurricanes in this series. But what do you think now going into the second round series against Carolina starting tomorrow night?
Yeah, I'm being honest. I'm not as optimistic about this series because, as I said, not only did I think Carolina was going to be the team to beat in the division, I thought that they were a legitimate Stanley Cup contender before the season. And it's funny, you mentioned the ex-Rangers. They don't really, much like when we called the Tampa Bay Lightning the Tampa Bay ex-Rangers like a couple years ago, back when they had Girardi and Callahan and McDonough, who they still have. Like, the same thing holds true with them. The ex-Rangers don't even make up the main core of their roster, but again, much like with the Lightning in those years, that it just showed you how deep they are when we mentioned that they had some really solid role players who just so happen to be former Rangers, but also the superstar names that I mentioned. Vinny Trocheck is another one. Brett Pesce. They're just so deep. And if I had to make my prediction, I unfortunately have to say Carolina Hurricanes in 6. I know the Rangers will steal a game or two, but this is just too strong of a team, and I think this very well could be their time. But with that being said, I absolutely hope I'm wrong. And before we end this, I do want to make sure I get some hanky fun facts in there for you.
Please do.
So, obviously, as you know, this was the first series won by any team that had 3 comebacks in games facing elimination, all in the same series. That is going to be absolutely mind-blowing when I look back and think about this game and realizing how historic it was, regardless of how the Rangers do going forward. Especially because, you'll have a lot of names on that roster. And this is another point that Jim mentioned last night on Blue Truth. You're going to have a lot of random names on that roster that you may not remember, but then once you know that they're on that Rangers, you'll know that they were a part of something special. And yeah, that was my main fun fact I had to get out of the way.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, one of the interesting things also is these two teams played each other twice in April. So
yes, I was at both those games.
Yeah, and so Carolina won both of them 4-2 on April 12th and 4-3 on the 26th. So they played each other recently, and I wonder if that always has something to do if that affects this series at all. The recent matchups, but you go ahead.
I think it could, and here's one thing though to think about that could help the Rangers. Like, you look at the second game of that series, they were down 4 in that regular season series. They were down 4-1 at one point. They almost came back from a 4-1 deficit, and this was a game where they didn't have Panarin. Panarin was dealing with an upper body injury. He left that game. I think it was either in the first or second period. They also were without Andrew Kopp. They were resting like some guys because of precautionary reason. It was like right at the end of the season, and for them to almost come back, I think maybe that could give you an idea that the Rangers might not be as easy of an opponent for the Carolina Hurricanes as you might think. But another thing that really should be considered, as much as I've been praising and like talking about how skilled the Carolina Hurricanes are, let's also not forget another thing. It took 7 games for them to take out the Boston Bruins. Now, granted, the Bruins are another team that's had many Stanley Cup playoff run over the past few years. They still have a lot of their core from that cup win, or a good fraction of their core from that cup winning team in 11, and some of the guys who stuck around for the runner-up finishes in 13 and 19. But it is the point of what I'm saying is anything can happen.
Yeah, and I was just looking. So Anderson's status is actually not definite. I heard one report that he might be coming back, but the preview sites are saying that he may not be back. So it may be the former Ranger Antti Raanta that's going in. And like you said, that I thought was very interesting. Now, Carolina dominated the Bruins at home, and they do have home ice advantage in this series. So that could mean something when you look at it. So
Carolina had one of the best home records in the league, if I'm not mistaken, too. So yeah.
Yes. So I'm just looking here. So it looks like it might be Raanta in net for the Hurricanes, but you look at it, if they don't commit any turnovers or anything, I think the Rangers are going to have a tougher time in this series than they did against the Penguins. And
I would also say stay out of the box. But then again, let's also not forget Pittsburgh was on the receiving end of some ticky-tacky calls again. I don't want to come across as that like Ranger fan who's a sore winner, but I'm just saying that some of the refs' calls in that first round can't really be ignored. But even so, I still think the Rangers should stay out of the box.
I think special teams always means something. I mean, you saw it in the Penguins series about it.
Oh, Queens games.
Sure. And
Queens games.
I was thinking about this also with the Penguins side of things. This could be the very last time that we see this kind of Penguins team together. Because, Malkin, we know, is a free agent. Brian Attard, who we had on the show 2 weeks ago, had said that they basically were piecemealing this team together with tape and everything. I think they might have a different look on them going into next year. So, yeah.
And Noah Deibler, another one of our good buddies from the Sports Box, he also came on at the end of Blue Truth to give his perspective from the side of things. He says he also thinks the Penguins should eventually slowly start to like embrace a rebuild, because that with the way they're currently constructed, I don't know how long they can really keep going at it. And you look at the Red Wings, like they were once a powerhouse for so long. They had a streak of like 20 plus years going to the playoffs. All good things for every team come to an end. But you know what? As Noah will tell you, he's seen a lot of success. That team has done a lot over the past 30 years. I think it's pretty much inevitable that things are going to start to change, and you're going to see a change in the guard. Not really just from them, but Washington, the two teams that I thought of as like having the faces of the franchise ever since I really started following hockey.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And we saw Florida win that series too. Yeah, I'm like you said, I'm not as confident this go around. I mean, the reason why I would have confidence with the Rangers is Igor, but I mean he's going to have to be flawless. I think because Carolina I think is that good. I really could see the Hurricanes winning this series in 5. I really do. But as long as Igor's in net, the Rangers have a chance. And we've seen goaltenders steal games, and the Rangers could definitely steal a couple in this series and maybe make it back to the Garden. And that's where we did see Carolina have a disadvantage in the Bruins series was going on the road. And I thought they would take care of the Bruins easily, but it went 7, and they were able to get by in 7. But this will be a fun series. As somebody now who lives in South Carolina, and I just want to mention one thing real quick before we get to the NBA playoffs. I cannot believe the story that came out yet on Monday about the fact that the Hurricanes are only going to allow Ranger fans Ranger fans in the Carolina area, so like the Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, to buy tickets. I mean, that is so ridiculous. First of all, the Rangers would never have this problem and would never do this because they would sell out no matter what, and they wouldn't mind. They would allow visiting fans in. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they're doing this. I know I put that out on social media yesterday, and it got a lot of attention. So, not a fan of that at all. That the Hurricanes are doing that, but it's going to be an epic series. As somebody who lives in South Carolina, I have friends that are Hurricane fans, so we will see what happens regarding the Rangers and the Hurricanes in this upcoming series. But like I said, no matter what, I think it is a win for the Rangers this season. It's been a success, but let's see if they can keep it going. The Stanley Cup playoffs have been crazy, a bunch of game 7s, some upsets. The NBA playoffs, they have also been crazy as well. We've had some upsets there. We've got 2 more series that are going to start tonight. And, we needed to do something special here at Game On to really look back at these series and look ahead. So we did an NBA playoff roundtable with our own Nick Morgasen from Empty the Bench and Beyond the Bench, and Paul Lombardi from the 3&D over with our buddies at Review and Preview Sports. And here's how that went. Well, the NBA playoffs have been absolutely insane. So many different things to talk about. The Phoenix Suns falling in epic fashion. James Harden and the Sixers are out. And the Milwaukee Bucks are out by the Boston Celtics advancing. So many things to discuss. So we needed to do things here on Game On and change it up. So we are doing sort of an NBA roundtable, even though it's going to look like a square, a 4-person square. Imagine it being a roundtable in your living room. And joining us to talk about the NBA and be part of this roundtable is our very own Nick Morgasen from Empty the Bench, and also joining us from the 3&D over with our friends at the Review and Preview channel is Paul Lombardi. Nick, Paul, welcome. How are you guys?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on, Johnny. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Paul. Your show is great. I tune in every week, so it's a pleasure to have you aboard. And Nick's always great, and we always appreciate when he comes on. We know he loves basketball, so we had an idea over here at Game On to do this. And like I said, I wanted to throw in some surprises, and this is one of them. Doing a little bit of a roundtable. Of course, like I said, folks, you do have to envision us being at your table right now. But guys, thanks a lot for joining us. There's a lot of different things to talk about regarding the NBA playoffs as the 2 conference final games. One gets going tonight, another one will get going on Wednesday. But Paul, Nick, a lot of the discussion the last 24, 36 hours has been on the Phoenix Suns because a lot of experts, a lot of people were talking about Phoenix possibly being an NBA Finals team. When you look out west, I wasn't quite there yet, but understood why. This series, Paul, I'll start with you. Absolutely insane for so many different reasons, but what's your overall sense on what the heck happened to Phoenix?
I think it was an epic collapse. I thought that it was absolutely insane. The Suns were my pick to not only make it to the NBA Finals, but I thought they were going to win the NBA Finals. I was super impressed with the way that they played all year long. I thought that they had a great structurally sound team. Devin Booker and Chris Paul are obviously their studs, but I thought that their role players, Shamet and Cam Johnson and all the rest of them were just amazing. Were amazing supporting cast. And, it's difficult. I saw something on Twitter, which was a tremendous point today, where in today's NBA, part of the reason why Chris Paul it hasn't been able to get over the edge and win an NBA championship. And I mean, he made it to the NBA finals last year, but why he can't get over it. It's very difficult for, a small point guard to be the dominant force on an NBA team nowadays in a league that's full of big wings and even athletic point guards. I mean, and even ridiculously tall point guards. Like, you can even consider Giannis at point forward and all those kind of guys. It's very difficult. The one outlier in that case is Steph Curry. And Steph Curry basically is the greatest shooter that the world has ever seen. So that's how he makes up for it. But Chris Paul, his craftiness and, his old school kind of play, he probably would be a 4-time NBA champion if he played in the 90s, for a good team. But in today's NBA, it's very difficult. And Devin Booker also is still young, tremendous player, but he gets a little streaky at times, doesn't come up in the big games. And when you have those two factors as the guys leading your team, it's difficult and it becomes pretty apparent. Those are facts that kind of slipped my mind, and I really overlooked it. I saw them make it to the NBA Finals last year, and I thought, this is Chris Paul's time. He's finally going to win his NBA championship. I thought the Suns were somewhat destined, but it's a tremendous point. And when you go up against a team even like Dallas too, who's got Luka, and Jalen Brunson became an amazing player, but they don't have really too many other studs besides Luka. You have a good supporting cast, but they got tall, lengthy role players. Dorian Finney-Smith, for example, Maxi Kleber, for example, just good players who give you length and know their roles. Those are all key pieces. And then Luka, being a 6'7" point guard that literally does everything, is I think he's establishing himself as a top 3 player in the NBA after that series. It's ridiculous, but that's my personal opinion on the collapse of the Suns.
I know Nick did a Sports Minute for Monday about this. Nick, what did you think about what transpired there?
Well, one, to piggyback off of Paul's point, being up 2-0 last year and completely blowing up the bed and completely losing was an abomination on Chris Paul's record in the playoffs. Chris Paul is turning into James Harden in the playoffs, where he can't complete anything at all whatsoever. He's a great leader and a facilitator, but he can't lead a team to victory. Now, to go back on another point, I would also include Embiid and Jokic in those guys who are point forwards, who really can control the basketball. It's weird. It's like Paul said, back in the 90s, the small point guards were the domination. Now it's the big guys who are dribbling the ball up half court and really playing that game. But to go back to the Suns, now that Devin Booker is off his relationship with Kendall Jenner, maybe he can now worry about winning on the court instead of off the court. Devin Booker, who can't control his own ego off the court and thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread, maybe he can actually figure out how to have winning chemistry on the court as well. And then I'm still confused that DeAndre Ayton, who basically blew up the ego of this team after he didn't get his contract extension and only plays 17 minutes and scores 5 points in Game 7. That one was confusing to me as well. And I'm going to steal a Screamin' A or Stephen A, however you want to call him at this point, where he says Devin Booker and Chris Paul were smaller than mini-me on the court in Game 7, combining for 21 points on 7 of 22 shooting in Game 7. That's blasphemous, as he would say.
So it is, and that's not winning basketball. You're not. I mean, you're not going to be able to win. It came down to Chris Paul and Devin Booker having to basically carry the entire load, and it's very difficult for Chris Paul to, be able to become that guy, especially when he's got such lengthy players that he's going up against. It comes down to size, I think, a lot of times.
And also Luka, who had 35 points through 3 quarters. This guy was dominating down the stretch. It's almost like the Suns gave up after making a big lead in this series. And they said, we'll win one of those games and we won't have to worry about it. We'll take it easy. Well, I think they kind of took their foot off the gas pedal and eventually cost them the series because you knew Luka was not going to give up. But everyone was writing off Dallas
thinking that the Suns were just going to run away and sweep this thing. I never thought they were going to sweep. I agree with you, Paul. I thought the Suns were going to go to the finals and possibly win this thing. But I didn't expect the Suns to just drop off.
No, absolutely. And I think you started to see the Suns kind of went throughout the entire regular season as the best team in basketball, and they dominated everybody. And, they finished 64-18 and by far the best record in the NBA. And then that Pelicans series, you started to see a little bit of untrusting and a little bit of life coming from the rest of the teams. I mean, the NBA playoffs are tough. The NBA playoffs are tough. You're going to get the best version of most players. Then there's certain players that don't step up in the playoffs and they go down as, being a tremendous player like James Harden, but it's easy. He'll forever be remembered unless he, is able to win an NBA championship one day. He'll forever be remembered as, he was a great regular season guy, but can never do it in the playoffs. But you're going to get 100. You're going to get the best version. You saw it at the Pelicans. I mean, Brandon Ingram had a tremendous series. Jose Alvarado out of nowhere. I mean, I liked him when he was in college, but I never thought that he would start making a playoff run in the NBA. I think that's part of it, and it kind of got into the Suns' heads because that was the first time that they kind of had to come back down to earth, and they weren't the most dominant team.
I'll finish this off on one point, and I'll compare it to another Phoenix Sun way back in history. Not way back, but didn't win anything either. He's a certain guy on a TNT broadcast that hasn't won anything, especially in a Suns uniform. Charles Barkley. CP3 and Charles Barkley have very similar motives here. Like, they're not winning. They're there to collect the paycheck. Now, let's be real. Chris Paul is making, $45 million, I think was the last time I checked on the cap. He's he's there for the dollars. He's not there to win.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say now is how long is that window really for Phoenix to win?
It's one more year on a contract.
Yeah,
that's about it.
Absolutely. Next year, the clock is ticking big time. The next year is a huge year for them. They have to bounce back.
And also the injury, which people are forgetting as well. We just found out today that he was playing through a hamstring injury, I think he was playing through.
You always find that out after a loss, though. You
never find that out after a win.
That's exactly it. I mean, I'm not trying to discredit him because I'm a big Chris Paul fan, and he probably was playing through an injury. But, was he playing through an injury every single playoffs throughout his career? He's done this every single playoffs in his career. Even when he was on the Clippers, back when he was on the Rockets. He's never been able to get over the edge. So the injury can only hold him back so much.
I mean, what's ironic about Chris Paul as well, and I know we're on a tangent here, but do you remember when the Lakers? Oh no, the New Orleans ownership was up in the air. Yeah. And the Lakers were trying to swoop in and make a trade for him. And that's when the NBA owned the organization at the time. And they basically said, well, you're not taking our star from us. And that was going to be the beginning of like a bigger three in LA. I think mentally that affected his career path, in my honest opinion.
It could have, because he would have rather gone to the Lakers than the Clippers. He wanted to team up with Kobe. That was the thing. And that could have been a scary duo too, because Kobe was just coming off his 5th championship, and he was still, he wasn't the Kobe of the mid 2000s, but he was still a dominant player. And that was Chris Paul's prime. That was when he was at his best. I think that could have been a scary combination, but something we'll never know.
I think they probably would have. I mean, the more I think about it, they could have really been a true rival for the Thunder. No?
Oh, absolutely.
Who knows what the Thunder would have done if Chris Paul had joined the Lakers? And then, not to mention, there's still the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, maybe the Spurs are still successful, but yeah, it's always fascinating when I think about a lot of these NBA what ifs. There's so many that have changed the course of that history.
Conspiracy theories, a bunch in the NBA.
You can write a 700-page book about NBA conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Paul Lombardi from the 3&D, Nick Morgasen here from Empty the Bench and Beyond the Bench joining us here on Game On, doing a little NBA playoffs roundtable. Injuries have been in the season. Another big injury was Chris Middleton with the Bucks, and that series against the Celtics. I think what you found out in that series really was that Giannis was being relied on way too much, and he even said it at the end that he was absolutely exhausted. So you look at this series, and I think when it comes down to it, it really came down to the Bucks missing their second big player in Middleton.
No, absolutely. And Nick, you can go first. Yeah, I think the Middleton injury was just mentally exhausting. I don't know physically, because in the NBA playoffs, injuries happen. Injuries always happen. You have to push your way through. It just happens. But when you don't have your 1B guy, because that's how the NBA is. The big three is not really a thing anymore. The big threes just don't work. You have Miami, you have the Celtics. Those were your big threes, but those were traditional big threes where the guys were willing to take less money, willing to do their roles, and then they really had scrap as the rest of the team to fill it out. Now, Milwaukee is a good team. I consider Brook Lopez almost a B+ to a A- player around them. They have guys that are great shooters on that team, but when you don't have your 1B player, you're not going to win. Even though this went 7 games and Giannis left it all out on the court, the Celtics are just a better team. It's absolutely true. And it became evident in last year's playoffs that Chris Middleton is literally the glue of the Milwaukee Bucks. Like Giannis is the star, I think the best player in basketball, but without Chris Middleton, it's very difficult for that team to win because he is the 1B, just like you were saying, Nick. I think that a lot of people kind of underestimate how key of a piece that he is, of how great of a defender he is, knockdown 3-point shooter, and a go-to second scorer behind Giannis, though, too. You got Drew Holiday, who is a great playmaker, a tremendous defender, all-world defender, and a good scorer, too. But when he has to be the second scoring option for your team, that's not an NBA title team. When he's your third or fourth scoring option and your number one defender and your playmaker, your top passing guy, that's the kind of team that's going to win it all, and that's the team that won it all last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Hank, I'm sorry, you had something I was going to cut you off there.
No. I was pretty much agreeing with you. Like, not having Chris Middleton definitely was something that hurt the Milwaukee Bucks. And it's funny. There were people telling me that Middleton was just as important to Giannis when they won that title. And honestly, I never really thought that was a stretch. And I knew going into that series, the Celtics were probably one of the worst possible matchups for the Milwaukee Bucks. And the reason being is their defense is by far one of the best in the league. And yeah, they've really had a big turnaround over the course of that season. They've absolutely dominated the second half. In fact, if they didn't have that bad start, they'd probably be the number 1 seed as we speak. So I think that'll be interesting to see how the Celtics do the rest of the way. And honestly, low key, I'm, as someone who cannot stand them as a fan of a certain rival, I hate to say it, but I would not be shocked if those guys won a championship.
Well, I'll give you one more. Marcus Smart, your defensive player of the year on that team, leading that defense. In my opinion, the Celtics were the best team in the league in defense. In my opinion, even though they have a lot of offensive weapons, you have Jason Tatum, who probably will be multiple MVPs down the line in his career. They play defense. They play both sides of the ball. It's rare because the Celtics back in the day were offensive first, defensive second. Now they're half and half on the ball. And that's why they're a much better team. Jason Tatum is the glue for that team. Like Middleton is the glue for the Bucks. So they need Tatum to keep leading this team in scoring. When you go back to that Nets series, he had, what do you have, I think he had at least one 50-point game in that series. And I think he had the buzzer beater in game 1. I mean, this guy has a knack for the clutch.
Oh, absolutely. No,
and, one of the big things in that series with the Boston Celtics and regarding Marcus Smart was he really evolved into being more of a team player and being willing to share the ball. Like that moment, like right at the end when Tatum had that buzzer beater, if this had happened a few years ago, he would not have passed that ball. He would have just taken the shot himself, and the Celtics probably lose that one. So really goes to show how much that team has grown over the course of a few years.
Yeah, and one thing to watch for the Celtics going into their series against the Heat here is Marcus Smart, the guy you were just talking about. He's questionable because he suffered a midfoot sprain in Game 7. So they're gonna test it out during warmups later on today, and we'll see if he's available for Game 1, against the.
He's not missing a game. I'm telling you that right now. Boston is way too tough defensively. That you're too far into the playoffs now, where you can't miss games.
Yeah. And Robert Williams is back now, and there's no restrictions on him, so that'll be a big thing for Boston as well. Like we've been saying, injuries, I think it's been a trend throughout the playoffs. I mean, we know everybody's probably banged up, but you hear about the star players really dealing with something, and that happened in the Warrior-Grizzlies series. Ja Morant dealt with, his injury, and, when you don't have your best player and you look at what the Warriors have and you're getting production from even Jordan Poole on top of, Curry and Klay Thompson. I mean, I've always said I think the Warriors are the most dangerous team in the playoffs still, with all those guys. And Draymond Green, as much as we talked about his antics and stuff, his defense is second to none. And one of the reasons why I think the Warriors have been successful for so long is this core group of players stays together. So you look at them in this series, and it definitely showed itself.
Can I just bring up a dumb point that Stephen A. made? Paul, you were there with me when we were watching First Take, and Stephen A. literally suggested that this is their last chance and they should blow it up. I wasn't Stephen A. It was Kendrick Perkins who said that, and
Kendrick Perkins,
him a new one.
Kendrick Perkins is delusional. Okay, yeah, Kendrick Perkins, even though the only reason he's at ESPN is because he won a championship with the Celtics. That's it. He hasn't done anything else in his career. If you look back, I read a story a couple of weeks ago that basically he was out partying, he was out drinking, he was smoking weed, he was doing all these things, and then ESPN comes calling and makes him the star, because that's, even though we hate the four-letter network and we get annoyed with them, they made him a star, and he's a big name. So he should just shut up and mind his P's and Q's.
No, absolutely. I think that.
I mean, this is the same Kendrick Perkins who suggested the Lakers straight up trade. What was it? They straight up trade AD for Kyrie Irving.
Yep.
Yeah, that would have gone well.
A straight trade, 1 for 1.
And then Stephen A. was like, "What?"
Man, if you're the Nets, you'd make that trade. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy because I think that Stephen A's been calling it. I'll give Stephen A some credit because he's been calling it since the beginning. He's been on the Warriors bandwagon, and I think the Warriors are just so locked in right now too. I think Steph is they're also, with all the teams that are left in the NBA playoffs too, it's going to come down to experience, and the Warriors by far have the most, and I think that over the Mavericks is going to be a key piece. And even if they meet the Celtics or the Heat, I think the Heat could be a problem because they're coming off, even though it was the bubble, and there is a lot of questions about if that's legitimate or not. They still have been in the NBA Finals within the past 2 years, so I'm very interested to see what kind of performance we get from the Warriors in this upcoming series.
Now, I just want to point out with the whole Ja Morant injury, I think he was the comeback player. Was he the sixth man or I think he was the sixth man of the year.
Comeback.
Oh no,
yeah, he was most improved player. Yeah.
So great player. He is going to be a star up there with the Tatums, and there's going to be a great core of young stars going in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah,
Ja Morant's got to stay healthy though, because we've seen injuries all the way back to college with him, where he can't stay healthy. He could be a great leader, but the weird thing is the Grizzlies kind of played well without him as well.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, and they're a very well coached team. They're a very structurally sound team though too. They remind me of what the Suns were becoming a few years ago, before they added Chris Paul. And they weren't really winning, but they were starting to develop something. You started to see Booker was becoming a stud. You started to see Aiden beginning to develop, and some of their other young pieces. I think that they have a really good all-around team too. Valanciunas is one of the most underrated bigs in the NBA. He's had a transcendent last couple of seasons. He's become a dominant force not only on defense but on the offensive end too. I think the Grizzlies are, they're all around just a solid group, and I love what I see from them. And Valanciunas is on the Pelicans. That's my bad. Steven Adams is on the Grizzlies. They traded him away, but I love what I see from the Grizzlies, and I love the entire core together. Desmond Bane has been fantastic. Jaren Jackson Jr. is becoming a player. I think that they definitely have a future. I like your point too about John Morant. Reminds me a lot of a young Derrick Rose. They're completely different players. Well, I mean, not completely. They're somewhat similar, but they remind me in a sense where they're both athletic point guards, playmakers that rely on their athleticism big time, where a knee injury or something like that could end up being brutal to his career. And we just saw him get a knee injury with the Jordan Poole situation. And luckily there was no tears or anything like that. It was more of just a bruise, but you obviously pray for him to stay healthy. But whenever you have an athletic point guard like that his entire skill, like his main skill set is based around his athleticism, you're always running that risk.
It also means you're not going to have a long career, because if you have to base your career, Derrick Rose, who somehow hit the jackpot twice with the Knicks on 2-3-year deals, which still makes no sense to me, and Knicks fans are going to get all over me for it, but it's true. The man should have never got another contract, but somehow the Knicks and their ownership think that throwing money around is like going to a bar and getting drinks for free. I mean,
as the Knick fan here, I'll say this: for the role that Rose was going to be with the team, I get why they did it. I think 3 years was too much, but that was one of the things with the problems with the Knicks this year was they were banking on Derrick Rose to be a big factor leadership wise and bench wise, and of course, he couldn't stay healthy. He missed a lot of time this year.
And when he was playing, the team was winning too. That's been the big key is since the Knicks retraded for Derrick Rose. He was part of the transcendence of their second half last year and making the playoffs. He was a big key piece, and to start the season when they started off pretty decently, he was a big piece. When he went down is when the script kind of flipped.
Absolutely.
That's why, in my opinion, they gave him the money that they gave him, because he the 3 years was definitely questionable. The years were the most questionable part, but the money was kind of just like, we have cap space and this guy is a main reason why we're winning, so we need to bring him back.
Yeah, and I think he'll help with the young kids, and the Knicks need to get a point guard. It's something we've been saying for the majority of the 21st century. Still waiting for one.
But can we
Can
we talk about the aggressiveness of the Warriors though also, because I don't think we give them enough credit either.
No, absolutely. It's true. It's definitely true. Draymond and the rest of them. I think one of the most amazing things about the Warriors too is kind of how they completely redid their bench and kind of flipped the script with a bunch of no-name guys and ended up becoming great players. Gary Payton II, getting like a fourth chance in the NBA. He's becoming a decent player. Juan Toscano Anderson, was a nobody that no one wanted out of Marquette. He's becoming a decent player. Damian Lee becoming a decent player. They just have Kevon Looney. I mean, Looney's been with them for a little while now, but he's a decent bench piece. And I think that player development has been a big thing for the Warriors. They're completely homegrown too. Like you look at all of their studs, completely homegrown. Besides Kevin Durant, they don't really sign any big free agents. Besides Kevin Durant a few years ago, that was really it. They develop everybody that comes through them. Andre Iguodala too. He was an addition, but besides that, like Draymond, homegrown, Clay, Jordan Poole, Steph Curry, like they all came up through the system, and even these bench players too. These bench players like bounced around a little bit, might have played a little time with some other teams, but they were nobodies before they came to the Warriors and have become some solid players.
I would say Looney almost became the Bogut type player on the Warriors.
Yeah,
roster,
absolutely.
right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Paul, real quick before I move on to the Heat and the Sixers, what did you think about all the flagrant fouls in that series?
I thought it wasn't anything like too besides the Dylan Brooks one. I don't think it was anything too crazy. The Jordan Poole one was, in my opinion, like he clearly wasn't trying to take out Morant's knee. Like he was reaching for the ball, and it was unfortunate. The Dylan Brooks one was very flagrant, and that was a really bad one. And I don't completely blame Dylan Brooks though. In the heat of the moment, you're in the NBA playoffs, you're trying to win the game and stuff. He's going up for a block, and he just got too physical with a defenseless player. And that happens sometimes. I don't think Gary Payton was going up to the basket, and Brooks purposely was like, I'm going to hurt this guy and take him out of the game. I don't think it was on purpose, but it was a terrible foul. And you got to control yourself better, especially as an NBA player. I think that was the worst one. All of the Draymond fouls and stuff too. It's like Draymond's at this point, he's not going to get the benefit of the doubt because he's been a complainer and a dirty player throughout his entire career. And that's what he's made a name off of. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you're going to, you can't act like that everybody's out to get you, when they start calling tic-tac fouls on you, because that's just how it's
your reputation.
It's your reputation. I mean, you see that with everybody. I mean, they did that with Dennis Rodman. They did that. They did that with Rasheed Wallace. Anytime he would open his mouth, he'd get a technical foul at one point because he was getting technical fouls every single game, it seemed like. So none of the refs were making a point at the beginning of the game, like, we're not putting up with this. If you even open your mouth, we're giving you a technical foul. Ron Artest, another example. There's certain guys that are, especially on the refs lists, of guys that are just nonstop play dirty and excessive when it comes to, foul calls and all that kind of stuff. And Draymond's one of them. So he's not going to get the benefit of the doubt on any call. And he's got to accept that and not complain about it. Like, that's part of his game.
It's also not getting the benefit of the doubt when you're constantly talking bad about the NBA like Draymond does on his podcasts. And I'm so tired of this. Draymond's the voice. Draymond's this. He's the voice of reason. Come on. He does a podcast. How many NBA players have a podcast? 100? I mean, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course he's going to get viewership too, because, he's Draymond Green, 3-time NBA champion. You're going to get viewers.
I mean, I also think it's wrong that when you flip two birds, one, it was Kyrie, then it was Draymond. Draymond comes out and says, "Oh, I make $25 million. What is a fine to me?" I mean, Can the NBA do something and make him hurt?
It's very egotistical when you go on your podcast and you trash the league nonstop, and then you go out there, flip everybody off, and then you say, "Oh, I get paid $25 million. So what's a fine for me?" So you're basically saying, so the league that you're consistently trashing is the same league that pays you $25 million to play a sport. That's the crazy thing about it.
But you know what? They like the attention. That's why they're not doing anything to him, because they know when he says something, everyone's going to pay attention to the NBA. So that's why they're not going to do anything until it hurts them financially, or it hurts them physically, mentally, or emotionally. They're not going to care.
Exactly. It's never going to hurt viewership of Draymond trashing the NBA. Everybody's going to still watch the NBA. So there's nothing that they're going to really step in to do.
Unless you're dealing with a Daryl Morey situation where he talked about China and he completely destroyed the relationship with the NBA and China, and that's how he ended up with the Sixers, because Houston had to completely separate because they lost their contract for games. That's the only time or reason you're going to see a situation be handled like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And real quick, this other series, the Heat and the Sixers, boy, lots to discuss there. Whether it's Joel Embiid's injury or, when James Harden being a no-show in Game 6. Paul, where do you want to go with this?
Well, I think that the James Harden kind of debacle was, kind of expected. I think that Joel Embiid is a tremendous player, and had he been completely healthy, it could have been a little bit different. But also, Miami is incredibly well coached. We're talking about a top 10, possibly a top 10 coach of all time in Eric Spoelstra. He is absolutely incredible, gets the best out of his players. And Jimmy Butler had a tremendous series, and this team is also, coming off of an Eastern Conference championship just 2 years ago. They are more structurally sound. I think that they have more depth, and they got a little bit better performance. The main thing that I thought was interesting was basically, besides Embiid, how the rest of the team was basically a no-show. In the pivotal moments, you saw even some key players like Danny Green, who's won several NBA championships, kind of did nothing. And that definitely makes you question Doc Rivers at the end of the day, because besides his championship with the Celtics, he's got a long history of this in the 2010s where his team just stops playing for him in the playoffs.
Doc's got to shut his mouth, too, when he's talking to the media. I mean, you're going to go out after the media whose job it is to cover you as a living, and you're going to say, write what you want, do what you want. I know how I'm comfortable. Hey, Doc, how about win a big game, and then people won't say bad things about you?
That's definitely true.
I mean, this series was so odd. James Harden being the leader of this team was a mistake. Now, Embiid was out for a few games. That didn't help the situation at all. But if you're going to rely on Harden to be your scorer, and I thought Embiid said something interesting towards the end of the series, that he's more the facilitator, not the scorer. So obviously Embiid doesn't trust him as a scoring guy. So this team is actually in a massive mess right now.
When they traded for Harden, I really I wasn't convinced that their team, especially this year, was really going to do anything, because I thought that they were kind of left decimated. They were bringing in Harden, who had the injuries, if you even want to call them injuries, and has been on a noticeable decline too over the past year or two. He's not the MVP James Harden that he was 5 years ago. And you got Joel Embiid too, who is a tremendous player but very injury prone, and got injured again in the playoffs, and they're a little too reliant on him. And the rest of the team too. Tyrese Maxey is just becoming a great player. Like he's still pretty raw, only a second-year player. And you got Matisse Thybulle, who basically did nothing. Is a great defensive player, but did nothing in the playoffs. And I still think that they have a lot of ways to go before they're an actual NBA championship contender. I think that they need to go after some different guys. They need to kind of change up the team a little bit. They're all in on a Harden and Embiid big two, which is doing this trade. They're kind of stuck with that because Harden's going to opt into his contract. So whether they like it or not, Harden and Embiid are their big two. They have to figure out what is going to be the good supporting cast around that for next year in order to win an NBA title. And it'll be interesting to see.
I'll add one.
I'm pretty sure Harden's washed at this point.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that as a Net fan, but the one point I'll make as a caveat: Jimmy Butler twisted the knife after this series was over by completely going after the Sixers. You guys should have kept Tobias Harris. I mean, you know what? I have no sympathy for the Sixers. They could have kept Jimmy Butler if they wanted to. That just became a horrible relationship for whatever reason. When you had a Butler and a Tobias Harris, and you had guys to build around to win a title, and maybe Simmons would still be there if the team was still not in shambles. I think Simmons just didn't like the team. I don't think he had injuries or mental health issues. I think he just wanted out.
I think that was a big part of it. I think he was tired of the team. He didn't see them going anywhere, and with just him and Embiid. And I think they had a great thing going when they had Jimmy Butler. And losing Jimmy Butler was a huge piece. I mean, Tobias Harris is a good player, but for an NBA title team, he's a fourth option. He's not anything more than that. Jimmy Butler, you're talking about a 1 or a 2 for an NBA title team, because he does literally everything. The Miami Heat might win the NBA title this year, and he's their number 1 option. They made it to the NBA Finals 2 years ago, and he's their number 1 option. So it's an interesting type of dynamic. If they were able to keep him with Embiid, too, and he's an extremely durable player though to Jimmy Butler. You don't see him hurt very often, and I think that's a big key.
God, that would be a heck of a finals if we had Heat Warriors.
I would love that.
Well,
That'd be insane.
Speaking of that, Paul Lombardi and Nick Morgasen joining us here on the show. Let's get to it. It's your 2 conference semifinals. What do you think, real quick, coming out of these 2 series, Paul?
My personal opinion, I'm gonna be. I think that the Warriors will definitely take it. I see the Mavericks are close, and the Mavericks, have surprised everybody, but they're still extremely reliant on Luka. And once again, I think that the true experience from this Warriors team too is going to come out and play a big factor. I'm taking the Warriors, and I'm going to take the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. This is going to go 7 games, though, in my opinion. I think that it's screaming 7 games. It could go any which way. I'm going to be rooting for the Heat, so I'm going to guess the Heat too. Obviously, as a Knicks fan, I'm not going to be rooting for the Celtics. But
but if you're a Knicks fan, you can't root for the Heat either, though. Even though those days are long gone.
It's true.
It's like picking the poison, trying to pick which one is worse.
It's true. I mean, it's the Boston Celtics, though. The Celtics are up there. Are up there as one of the teams that I hate the most in all of sports. So I have to, I have to put my bias aside for the Heat. I respect, I hated the Heat obviously when they had LeBron and they have history with the Knicks and stuff like that. But I respect this Heat team that they have put together because, I like Jimmy Butler. I think Eric Spoelstra is a tremendous head coach. I've always been a Spoelstra fan. And I think he's a key part to even that big 3 winning 2 championships. I think that he's a great player. I like Bam. I'd like to see them make another run and possibly win the NBA title. So I'm definitely going to be rooting for them. I'm pulling for the Mavericks. In my person, I don't really mind who wins the series. I'll pull for the Mavericks just because I'm a big Dirk fan. Like I grew up, I was a diehard Dirk fan. Dirk is my favorite basketball player ever. So I used to, when the Knicks sucked throughout my childhood, I used to root for the Mavericks a little bit. They were my Western Conference team.
Talk about the most unconventional 7-footer in all of the NBA. Yeah, don't get me wrong. One of the greatest shooters of all time. Most unconventional 7-footer.
Oh, absolutely. He was a transcendent player. That's what I loved about him too, is that he did everything his own way. But I was a huge Dirk fan, so I always have a little soft spot for Dallas. I like Luka too. So, and they're also the underdogs too. The Warriors have won 3 championships. I love Steph Curry, but there's definitely a lot of things to hate about the Warriors. A lot of people don't like Draymond. There's going to be a little bit of cockiness, all that kind of stuff. So, I'm going to be pulling for the Mavericks, but I don't think that they're going to stand a chance. I think the Warriors are going to end up winning it.
I think on the Miami side also, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson are 2 key players that really need to step up and play way better.
Absolutely.
Hero had the major contract in the offseason. I think it was like $95 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Duncan Robinson, a big one too. He just signed a huge contract, and he's been getting a couple of DNPs throughout the playoffs.
So if those 2 guys can really step up along with Jimmy Butler, and Bam plays big man basketball, which is what he's well known for, they're going to win the series. Now, the Celtics looked a little, even though they won in 7 games, they looked a little lost for a while in the Bucks series for big man defense. They had no answer for that. That was going to be the interesting thing to watch. Now, on the other side, I like the Warriors. I like the experience. I always think experience plays when you have that. When you have the Draymonds, the Clays, and the Stephs, obviously those guys are going to win. And I think those guys are I think they're too much. I like Luka, like you said, Paul. I'm a big Luka guy. Talk about a guy. I think he's like 6'7" as a point guard. I mean, we're talking about big guys at the point guard position that are mobile and can move around the court. But I just think the experience is going to fall to the Warriors. I think both are going to go at least 6 games, at least. And I could see them both going 7, really. But I have Heat Warriors, and I think in that case, I still think the Warriors are more experienced in that regard.
Yeah,
I've got a fun fact for you guys, by the way.
Okay.
This is a tradition. Oh, you know this, Paul. This is a Hank fun fact. This is a tradition here on Game On.
He loves fun facts.
That's right.
So I found out that the Celtics have been in exactly half of the conference finals in NBA history, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I thought I read
And
that too.
I also have to say this is going to be, I think this is like got to be what, the fourth or fifth time the Heat have played the Celtics in the conference finals.
Yes.
I know that happened multiple times
Mhm.
during the LeBron era, and we know that happened a couple years ago in the bubble.
Yeah.
That one's definitely going to be an interesting series. I think that one goes the full 7, but ultimately I think the Celtics are going to take that one. Now, as far as the Warriors go, I think at the end of the day, as much as Luka Doncic is amazing, I cannot count out the Warriors and their experience with the big three of Clay, Steph, and Draymond, plus Jordan Poole, he's also really shown up and been balling during these NBA playoffs. I got to give it to the Warriors there. So could be an interesting possibility for the NBA Finals with the Warriors playing the winner of the Eastern Conference.
Absolutely. And, any which way, it's going to be an epic 2 games and an epic final. And it's been an epic NBA playoffs in general. I mean, with the best team possibly out in the Phoenix Suns. We'll see what happens. But Paul Lombardi from the 3&D over at Review and Preview, and our own Nick Morgasen here on Empty the Bench, both joining us for a nice 45-minute NBA roundtable. And that's how great it's been. We needed every minute of it. So, Paul, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll have you back on again soon. And Nick, of course, thank you as always.
Of course, anytime, guys.
Thanks,
really appreciate it.
Absolutely, you got it. And our thanks once again to Paul Lombardi from the 3&D and our own Nick Morgasen as well. And Hank, like you said, I agree with you. I think it's going to be Warriors and Celtics meeting in the NBA Finals. I just think Golden State's just got too much on their hands. Can't take away what Dallas did to the Suns. I mean, Doncic being back after he was hurt to start the postseason, he's come back in a force. Spencer Dinwiddie off the bench. I know they got some other guys too, but when you look at Golden State, I mean, you've got Curry, you've got Thompson, you've got Draymond Green, you've got Jordan Poole. It's been a renaissance. To me, it's just too much talent. It almost reminds me of what was going on with the Bucks, and that Giannis was carrying the load there, and even he couldn't do it alone. But we'll see. It'll be an epic series there. And I just think the Celtics, even though Marcus Smart's dealing with an injury and he may not play at least game 1, I think the experience there and the talent is still just a little bit too much for the Heat to handle. But I think that series could go 7 games. I'm going to take the Warriors in 5, and I'm going to take the Celtics in 7 to meet in the NBA Finals. We got a few minutes left on the show. Let's spend it talking about the NFL schedule release. That happened last Thursday, and we were starting to get some details leaking out beforehand, and we saw all the national games that were being announced a little bit each day last week. We saw what our sort of Giants schedule was posted really the morning of the schedule release. But Hank, while we have a few minutes here, what are your big takeaways from the schedule release, either from the Giants side or even from the national perspective?
I think from the Giants side, it's a relatively easier schedule than in years past, and I think definitely there will be some games that the Giants will steal. However, let me take a look at it. I believe there's a 4-game road stretch on that schedule that is probably going to be very tough, even though it looks like they're going to be winnable games. I'm going to go over it one by one, if I may.
Sure.
So start off with the Titans. I think that's probably going to be a loss. That's a team that's very experienced and have a experienced coach as opposed to Brian Dable, who will be going in his first game. So I think that'll be tough. But going against the Panthers in the home opener, I think that'll be a win. Dallas, I'm not really expecting much. That's probably going to be a loss. And then you got the Chicago Bears at MetLife Stadium. That one could go either way. I think I might be able to get them win. But then you get Green Bay and Baltimore, which are both going to be very tough games. And then Jacksonville, Seattle, Houston, and Detroit. That's a stretch that on the surface, it looks like the Giants could probably win all those games. But I think in one of those games, there's going to be a loss that might be really, really surprising. And I'm going to say that of those games, I think Seattle might be the game that they end up losing. But other than that, you pretty much have the usual suspects of division rivals. They'll probably split with, like, say, the Eagles, Cowboys, and maybe the Commanders. But Yeah, it's basically going to be a year where they show some progress, but I don't think too much will. I'm not really expecting too much. I don't think it's going to be a playoff team, but I say they win about 6 games. I think that's a safe bet.
Yeah, and the NFC East in general has the 4 most favorable schedules this upcoming season when you look at winning percentage. And I guess that makes sense because the division's not that great, and there are a lot of teams that are really not that great too. Look, the Giants, I mean, that does look like a favorable schedule, but, we've spoken about it before too. What are the Giants going to be? This is a team that's still rebuilding. They've had to make a tremendous amount of changes because of the salary cap situation. And, Brian Dable, first-year coach, I like what him and Shane have done so far, considering the situation that they've been dealt with. They've had a very good draft. I mean, you get 5 wins out of the Giants this year, and you at least see some progress, and like where your quarterback situation is going forward. That's really all you can ask for from the Giants' perspective. But, yeah, no, it's a favorable, at least winning percentage-wise, it's favorable. But then again, we don't know what the Giants are themselves. I thought one of the things I took out of this of the schedule was this Kansas City Chiefs, how they'd have 8 straight opponents to start against teams that had winning records. And so you look at the Chiefs, who are going to be in a very, very probably the best division in football, the AFC West, although somebody to me is going to be in for a disappointing year. But that was something too. We know about the Monday night games now with Buck and Aikman taking over. There's going to be a Monday night doubleheader in week 2. So we've got that. We've also heard, with the national schedule, and it's going to be a different thing as well because you've also got the Amazon Prime games. So from a national perspective, you're going to have different voices doing some of these games. So that's it. It'd be an interesting upcoming season. I'm getting excited. It's the middle of May. Again, I don't really have a lot of expectation for the Giants, but if you just wanted to see some progress, that's really all you can really ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much the exact mindset that I'm feeling. It's not about competing or trying to go for the big one. Whenever there's a new regime and it's a complete rebuild, I think progress is really the only thing you could ask for. But I think I'm really interested to see more how the rookies do, like say a Neal and a Thibodeau. By the way, off topic, Thibodeau, I love that he was rocking it at Game 7. But yeah. Thibodeau is going to be I'm excited to see him be the next great pass rusher in a long line of great Giants pass rushers in Giants history. I really am confident that he's going to be that good, having looked at a lot of his film from Oregon. So, yeah, and you know what? I believe in Brian Dable. Again, if you really look at what he talked about, he stressed that, it's going to take a bit of time, but eventually, if they do the right things, I think they'll get back. You'll be back to the classic Giant football that we used to know and love.
And by the way, that game in London against the Packers, the Giants, I think might have caught a break there, not having to play at Lambeau Field. That was a break for them. But you know what? If you're in Green Bay, you can't be excited about having to travel to London. I know everybody's got to do it, but to put a marquee matchup like 2 historic franchises in the Giants and the Packers there is definitely something. All right, Hank, a couple of seconds real quick, and we'll get out of here. I want to make a quick baseball note. How about this past week we saw the Reds throw a no-hitter, and, they gave up. It technically is not a no-hitter, but they did not allow any hits in 8 innings against the Pirates and lost 1-0. That was something. I mean, I guess, when you're the Reds and you're 9-26, the games like Sunday are going to happen.
Yeah, no, that team, oh man, just when I thought I was done making material for them when I talked about them on Hitting for the Cycle with Nick this past week, then they do that, and I'm like, oy vey. And we all thought that Jacob deGrom had the worst luck with run support. No.
Oh, yeah.
I feel bad for Hunter Green. He's probably going to be dealing with this for the first few years of his career, and he's going to be wanting to opt for free agency as soon as possible.
And the Yankees continue to do unbelievably well. I mean, they play against the White Sox on Sunday, and they only have 2 hits and score 5 runs and win. So, I mean, you have games when you only have 2 hits and still win by 4 runs. That's quite remarkable too. And the Yanks just keep things going. The Mets are still playing well, although they had their first series loss against the Mariners, and they just lost Tyler McGill to the injured list. Doesn't seem serious. It's not a structural thing, but that's the first reality check for the Mets. And we've just got so much happening, Hank. I mean, it's unbelievable. We've got the Preakness on Saturday this week. Obviously, no Rich Strike in the Preakness. He's not going to run there. Maybe in the Belmont Stakes, so we won't have a Triple Crown. But you've got the Preakness on Saturday. You've got NBA playoffs. You've got Stanley Cup playoffs. You've got baseball. You've got football news. I mean, it's crazy. We're going to find out maybe some news about Deshaun Watson later in the week. So, so much happening. But it's times like this that we live for, Hank. Right?
You're damn right. I can't wait. And once again, LGR.
LGR. That's
LGR
right.
tomorrow night. That's when it starts.
Game 1, 7:00 Eastern against the Hurricanes. Game 2, Friday at 8. Game 3 at the Garden Sunday afternoon. And then Game 4 on Tuesday night at 7. So when we join you for episode 11, we'll be 3 games in, and we'll see what the Rangers are at. I think if you can take one of the first 2 in Carolina, you sign up for that right now. And
absolutely.
You know what? I don't think you really panicked over the Rangers until you lose a game at the Garden, and hopefully that's not the case. But we'll see, Hank. It's been an unbelievable ride, and that was one heck of an episode, huh?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And once again, thanks to Paul Lombardi from the 3&D. Check him out over with our buddies at Review and Preview Sports. Nick Morgasen as well, and just a programming note here from Empty the Bench. They will be moving their main show, Empty the Bench, to Wednesdays starting June 1st. So check that out, 3 p.m. Eastern. So you'll have us on Tuesdays and Empty the Bench on Wednesdays, a little back-to-back, belly-to-belly sports action for you here on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. And we are, once again, presented by Knack. These bags are fantastic. So make sure you use the promo code GAME, G-A-M-E, at checkout with your Knack bag of choice. You'll get a free TSA-approved lock with your order for a limited time. So, again, GAME at checkout. Get that free lock. It is such a great bag, and we are so honored that they are aboard. But, Hank, thanks again for joining me. It was another great show as always, folks. Thanks, of course, for joining us. Keep it locked in here to the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Subscribe on YouTube. You'll get notifications for all of our shows. And Hank and I will see you for episode 11 of Game On next week.